Good evening, everyone. My name is E.R. Anderson. I'm the Executive Director of Charis Circle. Charis Circle is the nonprofit programming arm of Charis Books, and Charis Books is the South's oldest independent feminist bookstore. Tonight's event is co-sponsored by the Auburn Avenue Research Library on African American culture and history, and we are very excited to be joined by Myriam J. Chancy and Cindy Allman for a celebration of the paperback release of What Storm, What Thunder. Brilliantly crafted, fiercely imagined, and deeply haunting, What Storm, What Thunder is a singular, stunning record, a reckoning of the heartbreaking trauma of disaster, and at the same time, an unforgettable testimony to the tenacity of the human spirit. So first, I'm going to introduce our interview partner, and that is Cindy Allman, who is a Caribbean girl reading the world, a Jamaican living in Trinidad and Tobago. She is a book blogger, book club host, bookstagrammer, and founder of the #ReadCaribbean initiative. She hopes to inspire you to read widely, and read Caribbean. And I suspect we're going to get some book recs from both of these folks tonight. Although we've already said we can't go all in because Cindy has too many. We'll be here all night. So we do plan to leave you with some great Caribbean reads, and specifically some great Haitian reads tonight. Dr. Myriam J. Chancy is a Guggenheim Fellow and HBA Chair of the Humanities at Scripps College. She is the author of the book we're celebrating tonight, What Storm, What Thunder, a novel on the 2010 Haiti earthquake, which has been named a best book of fall 2021 by Time, The Washington Post, BuzzFeed, The Chicago Tribune, Vulture, Good Housekeeping, Parade, LitHub, and Harper's Bazaar, among other accolades. Her past novels include The Loneliness of Angels, which was winner of the 2011 Guiana Prize in Literature Caribbean Award for Best Fiction in 2010. Also, The Scorpion's Claw and The Spirit of Haiti, which was shortlisted in the Best First Book category, Canada Caribbean Religion of the Commonwealth Prize in 2004. So we are in the company of great women. We are very delighted to have you both here. We want to encourage folks who are watching at home. We already have a really great community in the chat happening, so feel free to keep it going. Shout out where you're watching from. Shout out your favorite Caribbean books or Haitian books. And also ask questions. So you can ask a question at this tab in the bottom center of the screen. Put your questions in at any time. It's not disruptive to put them there. And Cindy will incorporate them as she sees fit. But otherwise, kick back, relax, and enjoy the show. Thank you both so much for being here.
Yay, thank you so much, ER, for this great introduction. Myriam, it's always great talking to you. I feel like
great to be here
almost every day, or if not, I'll see you on my Instagram, and I feel like I'm seeing and speaking with you. Honestly, I'm just so blown away and so happy about the support of your book. Like, What Storm, What Thunder remains a solid read for me. I read it last year, and it's still one of those books that I constantly recommend because I feel like it's what I would call required reading. And I have such a love for Haitian culture and Haitian literature. So thanks so much for writing such an amazing book. And now it comes out in paperback. So
yes.
Let's see.
This is the new paperback version.
Ooh, love. Ooh, Edwidge Dante Cat. Roll out. Love it.
Love. Ooh.
So tell us, what's the response to the book been like since it came out like over a year now? It's been over a year now.
Oh, we're not even on a year. We're short of a year for the Canadian edition, which came out last September, and a couple of months away from a year. It came out in the US in October.
Yeah.
So we're I guess it's like a 9-month baby at this point. Yeah. You know, it's about 9-10 months old, depending on which edition you're thinking of. But it's been wonderful to see people like yourself, Cindy, take it up. All the Caribbean bookstagrammers really put it on their shoulders and read it and tell people about it. And I felt, because I wasn't on Instagram before this book.
What?
I know, I'm a late bloomer.
Did your publishers tell you to get on Instagram, or you were like, you know what, let me get on Instagram? Like, how did that happen?
Actually, my editor, Maisie Cochran at Tin House, said, you need to get on Instagram. So, and they told me months before it came out. I think it was in the spring before it came out, I had an Instagram, but it was private for my pottery because I'm also a potter, and all the potters are on Instagram, so that's how I see what people are doing. And so she said you need to open a professional Instagram for your writing and let people know who you are, so that when they hear about the book, they can go check you out, see what you're doing. And I started building the Instagram around the characters, actually. I mean, initially just here's who I am, here are the books I've published, that kind of thing. I like to do pottery. And then I started building a kind of reference point for readers before the book came out, a quote from a character, and then maybe an image that might, you might connect to them, when you would read that character. So maybe I think I had a quote from the little boy in the book where, he's about 11 years old. And so but there's an image in his passage of a crab, walking sideways. And so I had an image of a little, beach crab, to conjure that up. So everyone had an image, related to them. And that's how I started building the content. And then, of course, since then, I've been, doing a little bit of bookstagramming myself, sometimes referencing a novel that I'm reading.
Come to writer and bookstagrammer. Hey.
A little bit, my bakes once in a while, this kind of thing. But the reaction has been wonderful. It has made some long lists in the Caribbean, like Bocas. It has made some short lists in California and the Aspen Prize. And it actually just made a long list in New York, where it is on the long list for the Brooklyn Prize, which is out with the Brooklyn Public Library. And they'll announce later this month, I think, the short list and winner. But it's just an honor to still, almost a year later, have it appear on long lists and have people still excited to read it. And I'm still hearing from people for whom it's, they're just coming to it. And so that's really wonderful.
Yeah, I agree, because I feel like in this space, or like people are very drawn to the new things and new releases. So it's always great when people focus on the backlist, because I feel like
that's right.
Probably churning out novels, especially really great novels. So there are so many amazing ones there. Go and read them.
Yeah, absolutely. Because I had heard last year, I went to a conference online about books and the book industry, and I heard someone say that there's something like over 3,000 books published a month just in the United States. And so I thought, oh my God, how do, because it really is, there's a new book list every Tuesday, right, of new books. And I just thought, well, in a few months, people will have forgotten about this book. And it's nice to know that people haven't, and people are still coming to it.
Yeah, I agree. So we're going to have Myriam read a piece of the book for anyone who hasn't read it, or if you've read it, probably want to hear more. So Myriam, if you jump right into the reading, and then we'll
absolutely. So for people who don't know the novel, this is a novel in 10 narrative voices, different backgrounds, different ages, different economic circumstances. About half are men and half are women or girls. And I wanted to do that to give the reader a sense of the complexity of Haitian culture, and also that when a tragedy as large as this earthquake was, with over 500,000 people perishing within the first half hour, and then another 1.7 million left food insecure and home insecure for quite some time, and living in IDP camps for 3 to 4 years later. And actually we're still internally displaced people's camps in Haiti to this day, from the first earthquake and also the second earthquake of August 2021. I really wanted the reader to understand that when something of this immensity happens, there's not the same reaction from every sector of a society, or even from people in the same family. So you follow 3 family groups who also cross over, primarily in the marketplace, which is where in Haiti, and I think in other places in the Caribbean, all parts of a society converge. So what you'll find too is that Malou, a market woman in her early 70s or mid 70s, bookends the novel. She begins the novel and ends it. She basically has the first word and the last word. And so I wanted to read a little passage, or a short passage, a couple of pages from the end of the novel, which is a section I don't normally read from, but this won't give away anything for people who've not read it yet, but it gives you a sense of what she remembers of that period, because the book begins actually in 2014 and brings you back to 2010. And then depending on the character that you're reading, you will be either just before the earthquake, during the earthquake, or after it, to give you a sense of what that continuity or discontinuity was like. And so this is Malou, and you'll hear her refer to her husband who passed away as a younger man, Lou, which is why people call her Malou. And she also refers to her granddaughter, Anne, who's also one of the characters that you'll find in the novel. And they're part of one of the 3 family groups that you'll experience reading the novel. And the third member of that family is Richard, which is Malou's son and father, but she doesn't grow up with him. And that is part of the complexity of their family group. But Anne and Malou know each other. So this is Malou. After those first days, the days of cleanup, of mourning, some of us wore the white of initiates for weeks. Some of us danced, but our movements were dirges, not celebrations of life, as they said on the television reports, especially those from the outside who could not understand our assemblies, the swaying, the wearing of white in the bright light of day instead of black. It was all that could be done. There was no time. They rose and set, but had nothing to do with matin or assuet, no day, no night. Morning came to have only one meaning, letting go. I did not dance. I watched, but I did not dance. Instead, I stayed still at my post, wondering what faces I would no longer be seeing walking through the market, the husbands who had left their wives, the wives having affairs on their husbands, the children hiding from their persecutors, the destitute, pretending that they were shopping for pantries that didn't exist. I understood. Even if you have no pennies to buy, markets can make you feel rich. All the overflowing, colorful fruits and vegetables, the trinkets, the chewing gums in their miniature, vibrant packaging, the made-in-China items that no one has seen before and marvels over. Only those who can pay can have a morsel of it, the bounty. The rest of us are banan, like plantains made soft when boiled. The days melded one into the other, light with dark. It was hard to explain later when those who hadn't been here wanted explanation for delays, but there was no real way to explain. Reality was no more. Time had evaporated. Those others were out of harm's way. They were safe in the unreal world. Here, life and death were stripped to their bare elements. All that was man-made fell, including time, buckled into the sky with nightfall. The horizon met, and we scrambled upon the surface of the earth like ants, instinctively following shadows to find our way. That's all we were, shadows, paper cutouts cast large against sheets of receding light. If I think about it now, this is all I can remember. The shadows of black ink moving against indigo blue skies, and as the night blanketed us, nothing but sighs and gasps. Cries in the night mixed with those of roosters and braying donkeys for whom time had long ceased to matter. When I finally got the cellular recharged, I found Anne. It's not the first time the people have disappeared, I said to her, not knowing what question I was answering. Not the first time, and it won't be the last. Mark my words. You listening? You hear me? Eccentric pronouncements of an old lady. It was as if a tragedy had made me a seer, as if I'd had a crystal ball and could see right into the future. I caught myself, thought of my Lou. This one, no one could have foreseen it. Well, that's not entirely true, Anne responded quietly over the phone. I stroked the stray hairs on my chin, absent-mindedly, comforting myself. Anne told me that she had read in the paper after that there was a Haitian sesmol, oh yes, sesmo, well, you know what I mean. someone who studies the earth and how it moves, all the layers, crackling, folding, moving, who had predicted it. But no one had believed him. That's how unimportant we had become. I bounced a finger on my temple. Who decided that? I said into the phone, my voice high-pitched. Who in the hell decided that? Even now, I think of all the lives that could have been saved, the little boy, the angel girls, their mother, Sara, with the shadow of a burn on her face, the tall girl with the model looks with her lovelorn protector following her like a sleek Doberman. I think of all the people who used to come in and out of a market, human beings. Leopold, whom I knew only from photographs sent by a distant relative in Trinidad, where some of her people went long ago, who came to make his fortune, selling his contraband on the edges of the market through teenage boys and staying in the big hotel on the hill. The hotel slid and fell like a stack of dominoes. Everything matters, I said to Anne. I mean, everyone, opening my arms wide, though she could not see me. Tout moun, we too, right here, right now.
Oh my word. This book just never gets old. Like, Myriam, you literally wrote a masterpiece. Like,
Thank you.
Like,
Thank you.
Like,
That's very kind.
when you finished this book, were you like, oh, or did you know that this was something that was gonna like really affect a lot of people? Because I don't know, like,
No,
I don't know.
I don't think, well, for me as a writer, I don't think you can predict how people will react. I think you get a feeling of maybe being close to getting it right. But when I finished my first draft and I had an editor look at it, there were still some things that I had to think through, questions they raised, and I had to think through. And then when it was purchased in the US and there was more feedback, there were some parts I had to move around. I had to, so for me, it was an issue of getting it right. So even though I knew I had some of a voice, I think I felt like when I had my first full, draft ready to present, I knew I had gotten a lot of things right. I knew that I had the voices, I knew they were believable, and I knew that it would have some kind of effect, but I wanted the whole thing to be polished, to be as close to perfect as I could get it, so that nobody, although, you can't please everyone, and there are some people
wow, we're speaking in superlatives.
There's some people who don't like it, and
who are those
there
people? Point me to them.
I'll send them to you, Cindy. And of course, because I'm writing on Haiti and Haitian subject matter, there is resistance. There is resistance to the way I approached the topic of Haiti and the earthquake, and that has to be said. And I understand that resistance. But I think for me, getting through that editorial process is what brought it to that polished place, where I'm not ready to say that it's a masterpiece, but I know that my first editor, her first reaction, even before I made some cuts, to slim down the novel, that was the word she had used. And she had worked with some very big names, which I won't name, but she said, I've never said this about anyone, any book I've worked on. And I thought, wow, okay. So I'm getting close to nailing it, right? Getting it right. But also getting it right out of respect, right? For all these, what people have been through, and for the people who are no longer. And so in that sense, I'm really, really proud of this work, really proud of it.
Honestly, I just feel like these are like, this book is just is one of these things that will go down in the Caribbean canon for me. Like, I've read so many Caribbean novels, and I feel like when I started reading this book, every time I pick up a book written by Haitian author, I'm always like, I need to like this, I must like it. And the entire time I was holding my breath, because I'm like, if I don't like this book,
what are you gonna say? You're gonna say, at least it's about Haiti.
Yeah, at least I learned something. And that's the thing, like, I felt like it was so atmospheric. I felt like I was in Haiti. I feel like I was transported there. As you said, the characters are very believable. And I feel like it takes a really expert author to write from the point of view of 10 different persons and nail it, like this, literally spot on. I believe it was the child. I believe this man was from Trinidad. I believe this man was out here selling water. Like, it was just, and there were so many complexities in every single relationship. I felt like when I had book club meeting on this book, we went on for at least 3 hours because there was so much ground to cover. Yeah, honestly, people did not want to leave because it was like, well, we didn't talk about this. We didn't talk about this. And how does this play into this? And I don't know.
That's so nice to hear, because that means also it's a book that people can come back to, you know, because there are some books where you just read them for pleasure, or you just read them, you know, to get your mind off something, but you probably won't read it again. And I think as an author, you want to write a book that people will want to come back to, even if it's difficult, right? Because maybe they've missed something, or they want to, you know, see what those connections are that maybe another reader saw. And so I wanted it to be that kind of a book that people would feel like they want to revisit. And, you know, I know some people are teaching it now. And so that means also that they're feeling like they want to revisit it with their students or different groups of students. And so that's really nice.
Oh, I'd love to hear. One question that I would ask is the title. I absolutely love a great title. Like, I feel like a title and the cover of a book and whoever blurbs it. Those are the three things, three initial things I look for: the title, the blurb, and the cover. And I feel like every single one, you tick the box of, okay, cool, what storm, what thunder, intrigue, like what are they talking about? The cover design was absolutely beautiful, and it is still beautiful for the paperback. And then the blurb, like being blurred by Edwidge Danticat, is just, from Edwidge said, must read it. I am gonna read it. Like, so how was that, like, putting together the final thing for you? I know it's out in paperback, so I'm not sure if the process changed. Was there things added?
Yeah, so it is a slightly different process. So the first book, of course, for those who have the first edition, this is what it looks like with all my little reading notes, and it had the hummingbirds, right? And I can read to you the passage that was used to think about it's just a little paragraph. Let me see here. Yeah, so it's in a section by a 15-year-old Tafia, who's part of a different group. And she talks about what had happened, you know, at the moment of the earthquake. She says, people who had been laughing and fighting 1 second were reduced to lifelessness, their bodies tossed by the side of a road until a truck could pick them up and take them away later, much later. The sound covered us all like vibrating wings of some giant hummingbird. In school, I had learned that hummingbirds could beat their wings 70 times per second. The sound from my own throat joined in the hum. Didier would have called it Armageddon, the battle for souls at the end times in the Bible. And Didier is short for Didier, her older brother, who also has a section, musician in Boston. So the artist, Diane Chonette, who is the artistic director at Tin House, was looking for something symbolic for the cover. And when she came across this passage about the sound of the earthquake and the hummingbirds, this is how she came up with the idea of the hummingbirds. And I saw a different version before I saw this one, but ultimately we had some conversation about, actually, I don't think we had a conversation about this, but she did some research and found out that James Audubon, you know, of Audubon fame, was born in Saint-Domingue before it became Haiti. And so she went to look at his rendition of the hummingbirds that are native to Haiti. And this is where she got the inspiration for this cover. And then, of course, the idea of, you know, the darkness and the light, you know, the hummingbird rising and the hummingbird descending. And she repeated that idea on this novel. So she inverted the, you know, vertical and horizontal. But you'll see that this idea of a rip, you know, there being something torn apart, is carried through. And again, light and dark. And her idea for this one was to think of foliage, you know, that things die and come back to life because some of the characters don't survive. As to the title, it had a different title when I was working on it. And this happens for every author. You have a working title, and at some point you settle into that working title. And for you, that is, you know, the title of a work. And so for me, it was douze, the written out version of the number 12, because the earthquake happened January 12th, 2010. And in Port-au-Prince, most people refer to the earthquake as douze, as a short. They just say 12. So whenever you say douze, people know you're referring to the earthquake, not to your own birthday or something else, douze. Or the event, bagay la, the event, the thing that happened. And so I was working with that title, and marketing gets involved when your book starts going through press. And marketing in Canada was like, yeah, I think that'll go because it's a bilingual country, and douze, people who speak French might know what that means. But then when we started talking in the US, actually friends of mine who are in communities of color pointed out that in the United States, douze is actually code for the police. And the book was going through press during demonstrations and protests against police brutality. So then people were saying to me, well, people might think that that's what the novel is about, and people will pick it up with another, idea in mind. And so that's when we started looking for another title. And I have an epigraph in the novel from Frederick Douglass, where he talks about, what to the slave is the 4th of July. And in that essay, he talks about enslaved people in the United States and the need for there to be a massive change in their existence. And he talks about a thunderstorm and an earthquake. And so I wanted to, bring to light this idea, not that we needed the earthquake, but that it is an occasion for transformation and change, which of course didn't happen for Haiti in terms of the response to the earthquake in the aftermath. And then later, in fact, in Didier's section of the book, Tafia's older brother, he's reading a King James Bible, and he's reading from the chapter about the second coming, and he reads. He actually cites at the beginning of one of his sections from what will happen, and what's the imagery there is that a great city or great cities will topple from the earth rupturing from a big earthquake. And so I thought, oh my goodness, when I reread those passages, I thought, oh, I hadn't remembered those, but imagine someone who is very invested in the Bible rethinking their lives through a passage like this one. And then finally, Tafia has an older sister who also has a section, Sonia. And Sonia speaks both for herself and her best friend, Dieudonné, which means God-given. And he has a premonition of a great thunderstorm, something terrible that's about to happen. And so that's when I realized that thunder and storm kept coming up in the language of the book, from the epigraph to some of these sections. And so I came up with the title, What Storm, What Thunder, which is both a sort of exclamation, in the aftermath, oh, what a horrible thing we've been through, and a question, what will come of this storm, this thunder, this cataclysm.
Yeah. Wow. I absolutely love that title. I feel like it just really someone says that what someone's going to suggest hurricane, but the topic is about earthquake.
Yeah.
But I also feel like it's a proclamation of what storm, what thunder, and things that are about to come, and what comes from something equals something else.
Mm-hmm.
I want to talk about one. I'm not a writer, but I'm always fascinated by writers and how they pull together their book. And he told the book from many different perspectives, and I just want to know what your process was in mapping out the characters. Did you write every single one after the other? Did you write one, then went back to the other? Did you write one family first? How did you decide to in and all of that? So that's my only writing question. But it's
a good one. It's a good one.
Yeah.
Oh yeah, it's a good one. Yeah, because I think, and especially if there's anyone, watching who is an aspiring writer, often, bepeople don't know where to start, or they think, oh, I have to start from the beginning, middle, end. And one of the things I like to do with novels is to try to change or alter the reader's expectations. And I'm doing that with a purpose, but sometimes, people think there's no purpose. There's no reason you're doing it, but you're doing it. But with this novel, I really wanted to break the reader's expectation of a beginning, a middle, and an end. And that's why you don't have a chronological telling of the earthquake. That's why you're jarred in and out of people's experiences of this time period, because it really was a fracture, for the population. I think for anyone who's Haitian, it was really unlike anything else before. And then if you lived through it, on the ground, depending on what you went through, there was a real sense. So for example, I mentioned the character Sara, I read from the passage where Malou references Sara, who lost her children in the earthquake. So for that character, time stands still. There is no, real before or after, just stand still. So you're stuck with her there. So one of the reasons I didn't go back and forth between characters, which is more typical of a multi-voiced novel, that you start with one and then you go to the next and you go back and forth, is that I wanted the reader to feel that sense of loss and rupture because they had to let go of a character that they started to really feel invested in and then move on to the next one and then discover through that process in a very sort of minuscule way what it might have been like, to witness this or to live through it. So the process of writing was also similar for me. And it was similar to something that Toni Morrison describes, which is I listen to the voices, and that's my process. And some writers are like that, where you try to listen for the voice. And then when you have the voice, because I had my list of characters when I started writing this novel, I knew I had actually 12 main characters. And I decided, okay, once I knew who they were, and by know who they are, I didn't necessarily know them by name. I knew them by occupation, by age, so I knew I had Sonia, who, is a sex worker in a hotel. I knew that I had Leopold, the Trinidadian, who is basically a trafficker. I knew that I had an old woman who was a market woman. The names came later. Some of the names changed, some didn't. And I wrote them mostly right through. So Jonas was actually my first voice. He's the 11-year-old boy. He came through first. And and then what happened is that as I completed each voice, I realized where they were in time. And very loosely, the novel moves you from people who are, sort of the time of the earthquake to those who are in the camps. So you progressively move more into the experience of the camp life, and then you're sort of brought out of it into, the present day, which is a few years after the earthquake. So it was more of a matter in the end of trying to find the right organization for the characters and to make that feel natural, because I wasn't using a chronological move. But it's not the way I typically write a novel, in the sense that this was the first time that I wrote, because I have other novels with not as many voices, but that are multi-voiced, where I did go back and forth. But this one was like, okay, I'm writing Jonas, and I'm writing Jonas until I'm done with Jonas. I'm writing Sara. And part of it is because I wanted those voices to be very unique and clear. And you have to stay in that emotional mindset, psychological mindset of a character, I think, to be able to really pin it down and not end up writing another character in a very similar voice.
Well, I'm safe to say you've nailed it.
Happy to hear it.
Okay, so you're right. This is a very traumatic topic, and I've read a lot of books that my book clubbers are like, this is so heavy. This is so heavy. Why do we read these heavy books and heavy topics?
Yeah.
But I feel like you handled this situation with such care that never once was brought up that, oh, this is so heavy. Yeah. And I'm not sure if everyone just like knew the gravity of the situation. So it is going to be heavy because that's what we're going to do. But how did you step away from that heaviness when you were writing? Because I mean, to be constantly immersed in such a traumatic time and going through that experience with many different characters, how did you kind of like step away and care for yourself, or just make sure mentally you could go back in and write these great characters?
Yeah, well, it was a 5 to 7 year process. And so, because I spent 3 years after the earthquake just giving talks, and writing essays and op-eds on what was happening on the ground, especially with women and children. And then when I stopped doing that work, I started working on the novel, and I really had to at times step away. And because I was writing in blocks, one character after the other, I think it was easier to step away than if I had been going back and forth between the voices, because I could say to myself, well, I've done this chunk, I've done this character. Let me, stop working on this. And I usually work on 2 books at a time, an academic book and a creative book. So I was working on another book at the same time, which, it's a kind of complicated book to talk about. The only connection between them is that the other book has a chapter on representations of the Rwandan genocide, which is why you have one of the characters in my novel who is working in Rwanda, because I knew so much about it. And there were lots of parallels, I have to say, with Haiti. So, so one of the things you realize as a writer working on something that has traumatized so many people, and you're also tackling your own losses in that process, as somebody who's from the same country, part of what you realize is that what you're experiencing sifting through that material can be nowhere close to what the people themselves went through on the ground. Mm-hmm. Like, you're witnessing it and you're feeling it, and you have sympathy and you have empathy at some moments, but you can always step away. And so you have to at times step away to take care of yourself, to see other things, to see the brightness in life. And of course, what I also try to imbue in the novel is that the characters also do that. They have, there is joy in their lives. There are things, whether it's memory or it's what they're looking forward to, or it's a vital connection. I mean, for example, Malu's connection to her granddaughter brings her life, brings her hope, And at some point, she, Anne returns from her work in Rwanda. She grew up in Haiti. She's an architect. She's trying to do sustainable structures, for poor people in Rwanda. She comes back to Haiti and helps, do sorting in the camps. But at some point, she breaks down. And Malu recognizes that it's not good for her to stay in the country, and she sends her away, And it's only when she's ready to literally bury her own dead, who are, from prior to the earthquake, that she calls her granddaughter back. So I tried to show that the ways in which we take care of ourselves, on a day-to-day basis, is the way people who go through something like this also take care of themselves, and to show that that liveliness, in the everyday of these characters. And true to life, some people had their lives completely changed, in the sense that they changed their own lives. Like a character like Leopold is based on somebody I did meet who changed their life after the earthquake, because they realized they survived and they still had a lot of life to live, So, stepping away, coming back, reassessing, making sure that the characters were round and, we're not just tragic figures. They're not all likable. Some are unlikable in kind of funny ways, like the millionaire Richard, who tries to sell water to, a destitute nation, but he's actually funny, like he's so obliviously funny. So I tried to have that balance in there.
Oh, yes, I loved it. One question I'm pretty sure you get asked a lot, but I'm going to ask it anyway, is if you had to write an entire book from the perspective of one of your characters, who would it be and why?
Ooh, that's tough.
Okay, let me answer.
You want me to rewrite this one? You have an answer? Who would you have liked to have seen?
Honestly,
more of?
I would like to hear more of the wife of the millionaire. Like, I felt like and everyone is like, we don't need to hear from her. And I'm like, no, I just need to hear. Literally packed up and left. But as somebody said, the market lady, Candy said the market lady. I feel like that's also like a solid one, because I feel like the market lady knows every single thing and is able to
had a full life too.
That too. So those would be my pick.
Well, so this is very interesting. So one very, very minor character, Loco, has had a bit of an afterlife. So he was actually cut. He had his own section, and he was cut from the overall narrative. He's the rainwater man who helps older people or people in need in the camp. And he's also an older gentleman. And I was asked for a piece for an anthology by Haitian writers that came out in Montreal. And I wrote, so part of his narrative appears in that collection in French translation. And then a fuller part of his narrative appears in Room magazine out of Canada. I think it came out last month. So he's had a bit of an afterlife. And he was taken out, not because he didn't have an interesting story, but his story wasn't about the earthquake. It was about his life on La Gonave, which is the island at the mouth of the port of Port-au-Prince. And so we took him out. So he's a very interesting character because he had a whole other life before he went to Port-au-Prince, and nobody knows that life. Nobody knows him from before, and he's also in his 70s. But I think if I were to write, I wouldn't call it a sequel, but a kind of a novel that would follow like a character. I think actually I would follow Sonia and Dieudonné. I think, because they're so mysterious. They are M, right? So they are both of, same-sex loving people, but they're best friends, and they make choices to survive in the country that are looked down upon, to be frank. But they have so much heart, and they have to create alternative realities for themselves. And so I think it would be interesting to follow. And it is hinted at, Sonia hints at the fact that she's a little bit in love with Dieudonné, and Dieudonné is kind of oblivious to this. And so I think it would be interesting to develop that further and see what happened, because they both survive. Dieudonné disappears to see after his family in another towns in the south. And it would be interesting to see what happened. Did he make it? What happened in that aftermath? What Sonia does? And then I also think Tafia would be very interesting because she's 15. And one of the things I realized after actually giving a lot of talks about the novel, I realized that Tafia, even though she's only 16 by the time we end the story, maybe, and then of course a few years older after, that she probably knows the most about survival of anybody in the novel. And that we know that Didier, her older brother, will come back, but she'll end up teaching him about the country, what has become of the country when he returns. So I think it might be interesting to see Tafia maybe as a 25-year-old, 10 years later, having, raising a child, since she was a teenager, and what has happened to her, and what has happened to that child, right, who was born out of violence in the camps, but was by the end of this novel enveloped with love, by Malou and Sonia and all the women, who were helping each other in the camp.
Yeah, I think those are very solid one. I also absolutely love the character who was in Rwanda. I felt like she was just so in her own, doing so many big things at that age, and really just trying to make an impact you just don't really read about young people that's going out and making these impacts. And
that is true.
Yeah, she wants to come back and do something for her country in an age when there's just so much brain drain and everyone is going through it.
Absolutely. But what's funny about you saying that is that, I was saying that I was writing another book at the same time, and there was a chapter on representations of Rwanda, partly because there's a Haitian filmmaker who also did a documentary on the aftermath of the earthquake. His name is Raoul Peck, who did a fictionalized version of the 10-year anniversary of the Rwandan genocide, which was actually a breakout role for Idriss Elba, who had one of the main roles in that film. And what's really interesting is that when I was writing the other book, I got kind of lost in everything I learned about women surviving the genocide in Rwanda. Well, not surviving and surviving. I also had gone to Rwanda. And I ended up writing so many pages, both for the academic book and for this novel. So Anne's section had so much more about Rwanda. Yeah. So now that I think about it, it's why? Okay, maybe you're onto something there. Maybe there's a novel there about Anne's time in Rwanda, separate from this return. That's very, because I have so many pages that were.
You're I have a novel. I have another novel there. Just waiting. I love it. I wanted to talk about the promotion of the book. Also, if you have any questions, please drop them in the chat and we'll try and get to them. But yes, ask your questions and we'll get to them. I know that COVID was like a very big thing for authors and not being able to do live events and just push your book in like an area. Like there's just so much noise in the marketplace and you just trying to push through. So how did that affect you as an author that was like debuting your, like, I guess your breakout novel, and how did that impact you having to do Zoom, and is this not as personal? Did you feel like that kind of like hindered? Walk me through that.
Yeah, I mean, I think there are pros and cons. I mean, what's great, I mean, right now I have one of my former students who's a professor here in Kuwait, Iman, who's here. And I haven't seen her in the flesh in forever. And so the fact that she's here with us is just amazing. So this is like a real, positive part of having done so many things online, that there are people that are very far away. We can all be in the same room, even if we don't see each other, talking about books and sharing. I mean, to me, that's been really amazing. And also because the book, is only published in 2 countries. And I know it's been difficult sometimes to get it in the Caribbean. And so I think being able to do online events has made it possible for people to learn about the book, to talk about it, or know where it is, even in public library systems, because I know there's a lot of copies floating around in library systems. Charis Books is in Atlanta, and I know that they have multiple copies in the Atlanta Public Library system. So it's really, I think it's done well, even though I know that during the pandemic is still ongoing, but during the height of the pandemic, it did mean that also people sometimes didn't want to read about heavy topics. And so I do think there was an impact, and that also could be why more people are continuing to discover the novel, because they're ready to read it now. They want to read it now. It did come out about a year or two after, 2 years after, 1 year after the 10-year anniversary, because it came out in 21. And I think in 21, I get mixed up in my years too. In 21. So it was 11-year anniversary. And I did hear from a number of people who did survive the earthquake about how much it had touched them, who were able to read the novel, both in Haiti and especially in Miami, actually. So I think it was good that it came out at that time, because over time, every anniversary that passes, there's less and less attention paid to the aftermath of the earthquake, and it's still an ongoing thing that people have to live with. So it was good timing from that point of view, regardless of if the larger marketplace was ready or not. I don't know if I answered your full question.
You definitely did. Okay. You definitely did. I'm going to ask you 2 more questions. One is, what advice would you give to young, aspiring Caribbean writers about telling their stories and the need to tell more Caribbean stories?
So the first thing, and I think you coined the hashtag, is read Caribbean. Let's read our elders, because there's so much amazing Caribbean literature. And I became more aware. I mean, I was reading Caribbean authors in Canada, like Marlene Norbezi Phillip, actually Trinidadian and Tobagan writers, Dion Brand, who happened to be in Canada, making films and writing when I was there in my late teens, and I happened to meet them at that time. But it didn't occur to me until I was, finishing my graduate studies. But I was interested in Caribbean literature, and I started going back and reading early Caribbean women writers and contemporary at that time, so in the 90s. And I just fell in love with the literature. And then I'm still learning, I'm still discovering, people. And so I think going back and seeing what people did, and there's so much innovation in Caribbean literature, not only in terms of how people are integrating, the creoles, the patois, the cadence of speech, whether they're writing in English or French or Dutch or, other dominant languages, but how they're really rethinking the structure of a poem, the structure of a novel, what can be done with a short story. And so I think for young people coming up, it's important to know what has gone on before, but then also to allow yourself to do new things, because if, older writers took those risks, even if it meant that it took longer to get a book out, or they had to publish it in the UK, which is what I was doing, with my first novels, or finding a very small publisher to start with, do it, do it because you'll get feedback from editors. You'll be able to go to readings and give readings. Going to readings, I think, is a great thing to do too. And then starting small with short stories, which is what I did, or short nonfiction essays, and sending them out to journals, finding out what the local journals are where you live, and start there, you know. And one thing to remember is that editors of literary journals are not in it for the money, you know, so they're not in it for the glory. They're in it to publish the best works they come across and to try to help young talent, you know, flourish. And so I think, you know, put dreams of having the bestseller, you know, off in the background. It could happen, you know, but I don't think that should be foremost in your mind as a young writer. I think you just want to tell a true story, tell it well, and in a way that will reflect well on your community, and even when you're talking about things that are difficult.
Yeah, I agree. What are you currently working on? Cannot wait to read it. And don't tell me it's a pottery. Don't tell me it's a pot.
Well,
wow.
Don't get me off on that. I wish I had brought one of my pots with me, because actually I have been doing some pottery, but I'll post about it on Instagram. I'm actually very proud of it because I actually got some family commissions, I'll call them that, and so I've been working very hard in trying to make some gifts for some people. But I am making pots, but I'm also working on. Can I show this? Okay. So I'll show a pot that I was asked to make, but I'm hoping I'm hoping that the person it was made for is not watching.
Oh, that is so beautiful. Wait, did you paint?
Yeah. So I made the form, and then I painted the underglaze, and then I carved the design and etched it out, and then added the color. You see. So,
wow. First of all.
So this is what I've been working on partly.
You're like,
but
for the next 20 years because I've been focusing on my pottery. Love
and
it.
that could happen. And you can end up with a one of a kind, you know, pot. But no, I have been writing dutifully. I actually started working on my next novel the very day What Storm, What Thunder came out, but only like a page. And then I couldn't keep writing because there were so many engagements, wonderful engagements, but there were so many engagements, and I just couldn't focus, right? Because I was back with the older characters. And then around May of this spring, I just decided, okay, you have to move ahead. And the characters started coming, as they do. And all I will say is that it is a story about two childhood friends in Haiti. So through the 40s to 60s, although the present day is early 2000s, and what brought them together and what, you know, wrenched them apart, how they come to, you know, that's all I can say. And there's a connection to the Dominican Republic, which is explored through this relationship. And that's all I can say. And I'm about halfway through the writing of the full first draft. So I'm excited about it.
Okay. Yes. I'm excited too. When am I getting the email with the first draft?
You could be a beta reader, perhaps.
I know, right? That is amazing. I honestly, of course, I'm waiting to read it. Okay, so before we wrap up, I want to talk about what you're currently reading, current authors you always recommend, and the last book that you read that was just really amazing, books you're looking to read that's coming out or that's on it to be our.
So, what was my last complete read? The last book I read I read, there's so many titles that are coming through my mind. I read What We Fed the Manticore.
The Manticore.
Yeah, by Kaluri, coming out with Tin House actually in another 2 weeks, I think. Mm-hmm. And that is a series of short stories from a perspective of animals. And I'm not a reader of short stories, I have to say. I'm just not. But I really love this collection. and I just wanted to get to the next short story like that. And that usually does not happen to me with short story collections. I was like, oh my God, like what's going to be the next animal? What's going to be what we're going through? Because she explores climate change and, human encroachment on animal life. And she clearly did so much research on what each animal was like, their habitat, even like their body parts, and I was like, oh my God, So I learned what a baleen was. Look that up, people, a baleen. But I'll give you my Haitian book recommendations, mostly contemporary. Ooh. So Émilie Prophète has to be my first recommendation, Blue, although I'm really waiting for her last book to be translated, which is called Le Village de Dieu, which is absolutely, absolutely stunning. But this is the only book available right now in translation, which is one of her first books. But Le Village de Dieu is a very complete, beautiful story about a young girl living in one of I guess what we would call a shanty town, but making a living on Facebook. And it's just amazing. Yannick Laes, Moonbath. This was translated a few years ago, and it won the Prix Féminin in France, which is the biggest prize available to women writers in France. And then this, for anyone who is intrigued by spirituality in Haiti, Mimrose Beaubrun is actually the lead singer of a band, Racine band, called Boukman Experience. They're still like one of the biggest bands in Haiti. And she was also an anthropologist, which I only discovered when I read this book, which is called Nandomi, In the Sleep, and an initiate's journey into Haitian vodou. And it is beautiful. It's beautifully written. And what happened is that her home burnt down with the manuscript, the original manuscript of her book. And she had to go back and interview everybody she interviewed to write it was her PhD dissertation. And it was all the, mambos, like the priestesses, who were at the time that she went back to interview them elderly, like in their 80s. And some of them died, like in the process, And so it's retelling the conversations that she had and what she learned, and also what she hadn't learned the first time around, because she was in this sort of academic PhD mindset. And then the second time around, she was like, oh my God, I didn't understand what they were saying. It's beautiful. It demystifies the spirituality, and it'll make you feel so good, and it'll make you want to talk to your grandmothers for sure.
Oh, those are beautiful ones. Okay, I have a few questions from the audience. Number one is, I was wondering if you'd consider having a film adaptation of What Storm, What Thunder.
So I didn't write the book with that in mind, and I know some authors do, think about that when they're writing. I did not.
It was planned based on your writing. You didn't, which is great. Because I feel like a lot of authors know, I'm like, ease me up, please. But yes, go ahead.
Because you can tell where it's going or what the scene would be. Yeah, I did not. And I think it would take some effort to adapt this novel. What's interesting is that there has been interest. Spiegel and Grau did the audio for the novel, and they actually asked for the opportunity to see if they could bring it to adaptation. So they are, shopping it around. There hasn't been a taker yet, because I do think it would take somebody really deft to be able to get it right. And so I don't know if it will ever come that way. I'm told it could take a few years for them to find, a match for this. But it's been really interesting to talk to the person who's the lead agent on it, who really thinks that if somebody would look at the women characters in the novel and really reframe the adaptation around the central women in the novel, that it would make a great vehicle to tell the story of the earthquake. So we'll see if she finds a match.
Okay. Next question is, do you write every day? And if so, for how long?
I do not. I do not. And I know, everybody has a different approach. Some people like to do, what's called morning pages, get up and write, even if it's not something that they are going to keep. I work from inspiration. That's how I've always written, whether it's actually academic work Or, I mean, if somebody imposes a deadline, I will work towards the deadline, but still towards my own pace. I have to find my way into the piece. I have to really feel it. I have to feel a connection to it, and then I let it come. Now, the problem with working that way is that sometimes when you get that, feeling of inspiration, is 2 a.m, and you have to get up and go and do it. It's really hard to stay in bed for me. It's like it keeps working in my mind. So I work from inspiration, and then I do give myself a sense of, for example, right now I'm working on the new novel, and I know I want to get through, X chapters, let's say. Like I'm in the middle of a section. I know it has so many chapters. I want to get through this section by the end of this week. That might not happen, but it gives me something to work towards. But then I don't time myself or say to myself, it has to be this many pages today. I just work at it. And then I feel satisfied when I finish that section, however I'm working through that particular narrative.
Yeah. Last question is the new content in the paperback? Like, was there anything changed? Was there stuff added?
Yeah. So the new content is, well, I have to point out that there is also this blurb from Margaret Atwood. That was lovely, and that lovely addition. And then you get a reader's guide. There's a reader's guide now. And there's also an outtake from the NPR interview with Weekend Edition, which happened, I think it was in October of last year. And so you get that too with a link, to see to get to the full interview. So it really helps for book clubs. Yeah. It helps for teachers, or if you're somebody who's maybe like a graduate student working on your own, then you have some insight maybe into some ways to break down the novel.
Oh, yes. I wish I had that for my book club.
Well, in the future.
I know, like, let's talk about every single character. Let's talk about every single theme. Let's talk about every single, we're going to be here all night.
Absolutely.
I know, if you haven't already read What Storm, What Thunder, you should. If you haven't bought every single copy for every family member, you absolutely should. Myriam, is always great talking to you. I'm looking forward to more of your pottery, and I'm gonna have ER come in and close us off. Thanks everyone for joining us. Please go and purchase the book.
Thank you, everybody. Thank you so much, Cindy.
Thank you, Cindy. You've done my job for me, which is just to say, please buy the book. Click this teal button at the bottom of the screen to buy What Storm, What Thunder from Charis. It really does help us when you buy event books from us. If you already have the book and you would like to support Charis Circle, our nonprofit, which does all of our events and helps pay for this platform, you could do that. A donation of any amount really does support our work and helps us, so no amount is too small. Thank you to Auburn Avenue Research Library. If you're located in Atlanta, go visit the library. It's a beautiful place to do archival research. So if you're somebody who wants to write a novel that is informed by research, know that archive is a world-class archive, and it's right here in the city of Atlanta. So go visit it. They also have a great online archive. We're very lucky to be in partnership with them. And thank you to everyone watching at home. We've had a beautiful and robust audience with us tonight from all over the world. So that is wonderful. And it's always a treat to have everybody watching with us. So thank you all very much for being with us. Thank you, Cindy. And thank you, Myriam, for such a beautiful and important book. We're very honored to get to celebrate it with you.
Thank you. Thank you for having me.
Bye.
And stay safe and well, and take good care. And we hope to see you in Atlanta sometime soon.
I'll take you up on that. Bye-bye, everybody. Have a good night.